Hello, friends. I'm Michael Daniels. I'm the founder and CEO of the app Fayr, which stands for Family Advocacy is Your Responsibility. Fayr is the best, most intuitive co-parenting app for all of you co-parents out there trying to communicate constructively with your co-parent without having necessarily communicate verbally. I am today joined, as always, by my co-host Susan Guthrie and Gabrielle Hartley. And we have a special guest today that I'm going to let Gabrielle go ahead and introduce to you. We're super excited to have this gentleman.
Yeah, we are super excited to have Ben Heldfond with us today. He, together with his former spouse, Nikki, are the authors of Our Happy Divorce. They have a fantastically blended family. They're highly functional in a way many can only dream of. It's an incredible book. They have a wonderful story, and we are all three. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're super excited to have Ben on to hear about his story and how he and his family have been able to navigate forward, keeping things happy as much as possible. Fantastically blended family. They're highly functional in a way many can only dream of. It's an incredible book. They have a wonderful story, and we are all three. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're super excited to have Ben on to hear about his story and how he and his family have been able to navigate forward, keeping things happy as much as possible. Fantastically blended family. They're highly functional in a way many can only dream of. It's an incredible book. They have a wonderful story, and we are all three. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're super excited to have Ben on to hear about his story and how he and his family have been able to navigate forward, keeping.
Yay, there we go.
That doesn't normally happen.
We are that excited to have you with us, Ben.
I heard everything, and then I heard everything again. I thought this is the best thing ever. Like, I'm getting hyped twice.
Exactly.
Three times.
Well,
there are three of us, so.
Yeah, well, I heard Gab's like looped. It's like very excited, and all of a sudden, and then I saw everybody hold up their books, and then I don't know. Anyways, it's about time. That's all I got to do, people. I mean, it's like it's a rite of passage that I'm on the Fayr live stream. I feel honored and humbled to be a part of it. And unfortunately, Nikki,
the honor is all ours.
Yeah, unfortunately, Nikki couldn't come. She's I don't know, Susan. You know, she's becoming less and less amenable to these live streams. But the Happy Divorce is still good. Everything's fine. I talked to her.
Everything's still happy. I was just because I didn't get to meet her, so I'm like, are we all still happy?
Oh, you haven't met her yet.
I haven't. I've been on Our Happy Divorce twice, I think. So we're gonna have to put that out. I'm dying to meet her.
She's not
awesome.
What?
Nikki's awesome. But I do think people start to wonder, maybe the Happy Divorce isn't so happy anymore. That I can speak from an outsider's view. We were all together on Monday night for Our Happy Divorce Facebook live stream, and Nikki was her usual beautiful smiling self. So
pretty soon we're gonna have to Weekend at Bernie's her and just prop her up next. Yeah. She falls over. I'll just have to put it back on. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're really happy to talk about you, Ben. You're just such an interesting guy. There's not a lot of men in this space who talk openly and emotionally about these sort of subjects, and you've got what's one heck of an impressive story. I was lucky enough to spend all day with you. You're up in Tampa, so we live just same state, just up the road a little bit. And one thing that really impressed me about you is just how passionate you are. Normally, when I walk around and talk to people about Fayr, I have a few different versions that I present Fayr in. And what struck me about you is you kind of almost chased me for a second and said, "Hey, this has got to stay in the spirit of like the real big vision of what we're trying to achieve here." And I don't know, it was really great. You kind of left me rendered conscious of just how important it is to take a view on this thing of just being magnanimous, being forgiving, being good, and you really do embody all of that in the way you talk, and of course the way you've lived your life. You want to explain, your situation, your son Asher, and what your story is? It's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's as Susan knows, I'll try to keep it short, but I usually say that, and that's the worst thing possible. I mean, it started, and I got my first sort of taste of divorce at 13 years old when my mom and dad were fighting, and I'd never really heard them fighting, but for about a week they were just we could hear them in our bedroom yelling, and then all of a sudden they sat us all down and said that Dad was leaving, and it was about 2 weeks before my bar mitzvah, and that was it. Dad left. He was always there, but we didn't have a happy divorce. My parents didn't have a happy divorce. It was a high conflict. My parents, not now I realize, didn't do it intentionally. Like that fighting at the kitchen table wasn't about how they were going to screw up our lives, or how they were going to bring us in the middle. It wasn't premeditated. They just dealt with the divorce like so many people do, and with these negative, feelings. And so, I was caught up in that. And then I quickly learned how I could use this divorce to my advantage. And, because I was sort of a mischievous kid, to say the least. And
that's so surprising.
Yeah, right. Don't tell anybody.
I'm kidding.
No dummy there.
Yeah, I realized that pretty soon into the divorce, my parents were parenting from trying to get parent of the year or favorite parent, not parent of the year. So the rule, and I knew they didn't talk. So I, quickly with my sort of manipulative self, learned that I could get a lot out of this, like freedom, more money, more allowance. And so I used the system. I figured if they were going to use me, I was going to use them right back. And so I got into a lot of trouble, with all this freedom at a young age. And I got involved with some drugs and some alcohol, actually a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol. And it became a problem pretty quickly. Luckily I was able to stop drinking and doing drugs at a pretty early age, about 21. But the divorce, look, it didn't help my disease, but I'm still determined that it had nothing to do with why I became an alcoholic. It sure sort of sprinkled Miracle-Gro on the growth of the disease, but I'm not an alcoholic or drug addict because my parents divorced. And then I met Nikki. I think I probably was 26, 27. We went through every red light, every flashing stop sign, the railroad track. We just blew through all of them. And we were at that age, had been dating a couple of years. She was going to move to Tampa, and she asked me if I wanted to move. And I thought I was young. I thought I was in love. Looking back, got in love and loving each other completely, mixed up. And so I moved to Tampa with her, and I moved to Tampa with her family, and we had a beautiful son. And it was always one of those things where if only we did this, if only we moved houses, it would change the relationship. And we were always trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And then instead of realizing a square peg doesn't fit in a round hole, we would continually try to fit that square peg in the round hole and get madder and more, resentful at the other one that they weren't doing it right, or whatever it is, and until it finally just sort of exploded into a very dramatic moment in my life that I'm not very proud of. And we, divorce, anybody's gone through it, it's obviously not, you just don't wake up one day and tap the other one on the shoulder and say, for today I feel like getting divorced. And for Nikki and I, it was a year and a half of trying to make it work, in alcohol terms. I used to drink beer instead of drinking whiskey because I thought it was going to help. And so we were just trying to do different things and repeating the same mistakes and definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And then it hit me one day that in my mind, this is just where I was at that point, Nikki was never going to change. And therefore I had to leave. And so I took a picture of us, I ripped it in half, and I took my ring and I put the ring in between the tear of the picture, and I left the house.
Wow.
Very, very dramatic.
Drama king right there.
Wow.
not my proudest moment, but that's really where I was mentally. Is I just
how old were you at that point?
I was. It's a good question. 30. Let's see. Now you're going to make me do math on the.
That's all right.
It was 13. Well, it was probably 14 years ago. So I was 33. And so I left, and I left in a state of mind that was just, like I look back on it, just the idea of me leaving that, the picture with the ring was just so dramatic and so really sort of outside of my character. But I was insane. I was crazy. I was, and everything in our marriage was Nikki's fault. Everything. And so I convinced myself that I had to tell the world and make sure the world knew that it was all Nikki's fault. And it was just a really bad place to try to make any decisions, much less major life decisions. And so I went out and I looked. All I knew about divorce at that time was what my parents had gone through and what I'd seen on TV and, sort of what we're surrounded by. And so I went out and I did what I thought I was supposed to do and go out and do my research and find the toughest, lawyer in Tampa with the biggest cases and the biggest records of wins and losses and best record of wins and no losses. And I found him. And I went and I had a first meeting with him, and he told me exactly what I wanted to hear. And he, was just feeding me exactly what my story was in my head as evidence to back up that theory or that story. And so he said, just off this meeting, he said, we have a case big enough to drive an 18-wheeler through. And so he took it to retainer. And I don't know, a couple days later or a week later or something like that, I got a manual. A very thick, probably about 35-page manual, and it was an attack plan. It was exactly what I wanted. It was how we were going to destroy Nikki, and let the world know what a fraud she was, and all this perception that I had of Nikki. And for some reason, I never read it. I just kept it in my backpack. I sort of am like Linus. I carry my backpack around everywhere. I've done it for years. And I put it in there. And it was a couple of weeks, I think. And I was finally on a trip back from LA. And I pulled this thing out. And I don't think I got but 2 pages into it, where all of a sudden I had this moment. And it was the first time in, I don't know, years that I was able to be honest with myself. And I just got that feeling in my stomach that I hadn't had in a long time. And that feeling is almost like the sixth sense, like it's wrong and it's not right. And I got honest with myself. And like I said, I hadn't done that in a long time because it was all Nikki's fault. It was all Nikki's fault before I left. It was all Nikki's fault, during or when I left. It was all Nikki's fault up until that moment on that plane.
So did something happen that shifted your perspective?
No, just reading the words. It was just something about the words that, I don't know, you never know when these sort of moments of clarity or whatever are going to happen. But if I really look back on it, I think it was just the words and the way it was so filled with apathy. It was so apathetic and it was so destructive. And it brought me back to when I was a kid, and it was like, I know how this path leads. I know where this leads. I've been down this road. And so maybe it was just the language, but it was no burning bush, or I can't explain exactly what it was, but I put it away. At that moment, I just put it away. I called him on Monday and told him I was going to look in a different direction. And if he could please send me back the balance of my retainer. And,
little tiny bit left.
Yeah, exactly. Just conveniently, there was about $300 left of a very sizable retainer. Nikki makes the joke, if she were here, so I'll say it for her, that it's probably the same attack plan or document he uses for all of his divorces, and just sort of changes the name. But my second call was to Nikki. And I said, Nikki, nothing's changed. And if Nikki were also here, she would say, Nikki's a fixer, right? Her family experience is much different than mine. Her parents have married 53 years now. But even with that, she was a fixer. She wanted to get back together. She was, feeling a lot of guilt around Asher. And I just explained to her, I said, I'm not in any position to start talking about our divorce or going down this path. I know where this, like I said, I know where this path ends because I went through it, and I don't want this for our son. So I have to figure things out for myself. And, I knew at that moment I needed to just take a step away from it. I needed to take a step away from lawyers. I needed to take a step away from Nikki. I mean, we still were co-parenting, so we still were, raising our child together, but just the talk of divorce and going down that, I was in no, I keep on saying this because it's so true, but I was in no state of mind or place to making any decisions, much less life-changing, not only for me, but for my son and for Nikki. And so, I went through this process, and the first thing I had to do was know what I already sort of knew somewhere, but had forgotten that it takes two to make a relationship, and it takes two to ruin one. And when I sit there and I was pointing the finger at Nikki, there were three pointing back at me. And so I had to really find my part in the ending of the marriage, because it couldn't all be Nikki. There's no way in any relationship that there's back there, because I think it's important to say that there are some exceptions to there's the physical abuse, and there are exceptions to every rule. But for the most part, any relationships we have that go wrong, I believe, and I lost it, but I've always believed that it takes two to make it, and it takes two to ruin, and both people have fault. So I needed to take a deep look at my life and where my faults were, before I could, maybe there weren't, but unfortunately I found that there were many. But so I went through this process, and I looked at, again, my part in the relationship, and I worked with another man who had gone through it. And, I wrote down what I had done wrong, my actions, where I thought that I'd wronged Nikki. And the list actually was shockingly long. Here I was with this denial that I was perfect, Nikki was bad. And then when I put pen to paper, and all of a sudden it became very clear that I had a big part in it. And then I had to read it to him. And I read it to him, and, halfway through this process, it became very clear to me that I wouldn't want to be married to me either. I was a miserable man. And despite, what my denial had told me, I wasn't the father I thought I wasn't the man I thought I was, and I definitely wasn't the husband that I thought I was. So, and then I apologized to Nikki. I called her up, and last she heard, I needed time. So I can't even imagine what was going through her head when I asked her to coffee. And we sat down for coffee. She has no idea, mind you, of what's about to happen. And I just told her that I loved her. I'd done some work, and I apologized for my behaviors, and apologized for, what I did to ruin our marriage. And that there was not, I don't blame her. There was no, I don't see it anybody's fault. And I cleared up my side of the street, and it was done in a way where I went in there with no expectations. I mean, Nikki could have said, F you SOB, I'm going to take you to the kid, but that, or she, I wasn't expecting her just to open her arms and let's have a happy divorce. It was just, I needed to do this for myself in order to move forward with what was inevitable, which was the divorce. And so what happened next was mind-shattering with itself. Was Nikki then apologized to me. And 13 years later, it is the only time that either one of us has uttered those words to each other in the 22 years that we've known each other. But it was the most important. And look, at that moment, it wasn't all of a sudden our happy divorce. It was all of a sudden wasn't like this life we have today, but it was freedom. It was freedom, at least from the past. In theory, right? I mean, it still was there. It's still, but we had cleaned it up. We had gone back and we had acknowledged it. And we also had told each other that we loved each other and that it was nobody's fault. So there was no blame. And so that's what our happy divorce was the foundation was built on accountability, taking a breath, taking a step back, accountability, and forgiveness. And so if you had asked us 12 years ago what our life would be like today, it definitely wouldn't be. We would have overshot it by 1,000 miles, because I think we just wanted to not burden Asher, our son, with the emotional bill and expect him to pay for it for something he never even ordered off the menu. But we just didn't want him to have to pay for this. And like I, sort of had to pay for with my parents. And so, and be in the same room together and just make it as normal for him as possible. And a lot of it was, faking it till we made it, and putting on our big boy pants. And, you start talking about other people and bringing other people into the relationship, and, putting on this big boy smile when you're around them, when your insides are, being torn up. And eventually we made it, and eventually it sort of became normal and it became natural. And a small example of it is when Nikki married Chad. She called me and she said, I just don't feel comfortable with you being, you and Nadia coming to the wedding. And she explained why. And to me, that's what our happy divorce also is communication, right? There was an elephant in the living room. Nikki addressed it, and I totally understood. And her reasoning was she didn't want people worrying about what Ben was thinking, or how awkward it must be for Ben to be at the wedding of and it made sense. But then fast forward about 2 years later, Nikki came and her whole family came to Nadia at my wedding. And it wasn't because it was out of spite. Like, I'm going to show her, like I'm the bigger person. I'm going to invite her to my wedding, even though she didn't invite me. But it was the natural progression of our life. And it's just gotten better and better and more natural. And Chad and I have a great relationship. Nadia and Nikki have almost too good of a relationship.
That's the way it should be.
Sort of.
I always tell my clients, like, listen, when he starts dating, you befriend that new girlfriend, because she's your best friend.
Yeah, and the power relatedness, right? Like, they both know what it's like to be married to me. And so, recently I've realized that I maybe need to pump the brakes on this a little bit, because I think that at this point,
good luck.
Yeah, both of them will choose.
We got to give a shout out to Vicki Townsend real quickly. Hi, Vicki. Vicki's the CEO of the NADP, the
Vicki.
National
Hi,
Association of Divorce Professionals. She has a great organization doing a lot of good all over the country. I don't know how many chapters they have, but I think they're everywhere. But hi, Nikki. I'm glad you're watching. Hope you're doing well.
I hope I don't put you to sleep, Vicki. So it's an amazing thing that we couldn't have even imagined, 12 years ago, and divorce and the pain and the suffering and the hard things you deal with, because it pushes, for me, it pushed as a man. And I think, women, probably struggle with this too, but I can just speak for myself. When it comes to romance and finance, those are the two big FU buttons in my life. And when those are pushed, is when stuff can go sideways for me, and nothing but relationships pushes that more, especially divorce, and the financial insecurity, and the somebody else being around my son, somebody else sleeping with my ex-wife, and all that stuff. It's just like it's all mixed up, muddled up into one, and it's a terrible place to be. And somehow we figured it out, and thank God we did. But we don't have to go through our lives. First of all, I'll say most important is our son doesn't have to go through what, I and so many other kids had to go through. And that's the burden of parents' decisions. But also that Nikki and I don't have to walk around with this toxicity, that so many couples do 12, 13, 14, 15,
50,
25. Yeah, whatever, the rest of their life have to walk around with this baggage, and also have to bring, Nadia and Chad came into a situation where they didn't get some unwanted luggage that they had to deal with. So, it started off truly as a selfless thing for our son, because we agreed that, we were going to break our vows to each other but not to our, son.
Your son is so lucky that you did that. You and I have spoken at some length, and when I read your book, I felt like I was Asher. Like my parents really did what you guys did, and I actually didn't realize how amazing it was until I worked for a judge in New York City, and I saw how horrible the process is and how horrible people can be to each other. And I have to say that, like, when you're in this spot where you're feeling hurt, betrayed, and you need to forgive, that's so hard for people. And had you not taken control of your side of the fence, you could have probably still been great co-parents, but Asher would have felt the burden so much more deeply. And it's such a wonderful gift that you've given to him.
And I love that Gab's parents were the OGs of Happy Divorce. They were doing it. They were they paved the road, which is unbelievable, that story. But one, and hopefully not you, no pun intended, but a sobering moment for me was about 3 years ago. Asher and I were on a fishing trip, and he turned to me and he said, this divorce really is hard on me. And my first reaction, again, ego, which sometimes I just have to take a step back and breathe, was I wanted to say, you little SOB, you have no idea of what a hard divorce is on a kid. But then it hit me, right? And then I was able to, just the logistics alone, right? There's of going and being displaced every couple of days, and forgetting your book bag at mom's, but there's the logistics. But then there's the fact that would never be a kid's choice for their parents not to get together or be together, right? They don't. Maybe now Asher understands it, but when he's little, like, he doesn't understand the intricacies of it. So,
something else, Ben, that I think about kids whose parents are divorced is they have to learn so much more, so much faster.
Yes.
And if your parents are divorced well, like you guys are, they're not going to have all that psychological trauma and conflict like you may experience if there's a lot of active warring going on, right? Like a ton of crazy litigation, and
and sometimes the kids become the parents.
Well, that's right. Like they're parentified children. That's completely a thing. And but sometimes I joke around and I'm saying, the most highly functional kids are the ones whose parents divorced well, because they learn how to develop executive functioning skills. They learn how to navigate different complicated situations. They learn to look at things from different points of view. And so, it's kind of like a joke, but I kind of mean it. When people get divorced, you are in a way giving your kids a gift. In a way. So that's like a weird thing to say, but I actually think there's some real truth to that. I'd be interested to hear, if what any of you or anybody watching feels about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely. Michael can maybe give a different perspective, but there's a lot of what's best for the kids thrown around, right? And sometimes it's used as ammunition, and sometimes it's used as evidence to back up a theory. Of why, your ex shouldn't be dating your husband or that guy or that girl. But, at the end of the day, our jobs as parents is to do what's best for our kids and protect our kids. Now, getting divorced, there's some that would argue isn't doing what's best for your kids. But what Asher over time has learned, because of the way Nikki and I handle it and the way that Chad and Nadia, who have a huge role in this, is that he gets to have two parents that are apart that are happy, then two parents that are together miserable, and then learn about relationships that way and what loveless marriages or relationships look like. Now he has two great examples of healthy, loving marriages, because Nikki and Chad, and at least as of today, Nadia and I keep on waiting for her to wake up and realize, oh God, what have I done? But it's been 7 years and she hasn't yet. So that's for me looking back on it, is that he now has an opportunity to really have faith in marriage, have faith that it works, whereas quite frankly, I didn't. And even when I went in to marry Nadia, I didn't want to get remarried. I had you can imagine with parents that were divorced, and then I repeated the cycle. And although I kind of broke the cycle with the way I did it, my bullishness on marriage was not very strong. And it wasn't, to add a little insanity to the story, it was my ex-wife who called me out on my BS and said, "What are you doing? Why? You're an idiot." In Nikki's, Nikki used a little bit more colorful language. If you don't marry that woman, you're not going to find anyone better. You're going to end up alone and miserable. And so it was actually my ex-wife who told me to marry Nadia. So, again, he gets a chance now to see, that marriage is good, marriage is possible, happy, or even if it's a relationship, which I didn't, quite frankly, have until I was 40-something years old.
One thing I want to point out is Erin Levine, our friend Erin Levine of Hello Divorce, just did an interview and a blog post with Asher, where she talks to Asher about his experience of your divorce. And for any parent out there who's wondering about the effects of a good divorce and a bad divorce on a child, right, should read that blog post. I mean, I always talk about, I talk about your book as every couple with children who's thinking about getting divorced should read this. Every parent with children who's thinking about getting divorced should also read Asher's responses to Erin's questions, and hear what Ben just said about his experience of his parents' divorce. If you have a moment in time where you get to choose a path and you can choose to have that good divorce so that your children can have Asher's experience, reading about his responses will change how you decide to approach your divorce. It will.
Yeah.
And by the way, even if, because like you guys, my parents were almost like, I used to say they were like the braggiest divorce people, like, oh, aren't we the best divorce people? And I'd be like, I think you kind of suck, but the truth is they didn't, and neither do you. It's just like when you're a kid, like you're getting divorced. If you're divorced and you guys are sharing custody, and you think you're doing a good job and your kids don't understand it, that's okay. Like, you need to forgive them for that. They don't have the ability of perspective. And I quite frankly don't think that I got my perspective until I worked for the judge. I really, I still thought that they were selfish, and, I changed houses so much, and it wasn't easy, but I think it was a lot better than had they stayed together, for a whole variety of reasons. So I would just say, be kind to yourself if you're going through a divorce and you're doing your best, even if your ex isn't doing their best. Ben and Nikki are really lucky because it sounds like you both do your best at most of the time, at least.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you don't have that kind of control over the other side. You can only
you never have control over the other side.
Right. But sometimes the other side is completely like on a different agenda. So how do you keep the agenda clean when the other side isn't clean? And how do you keep your own head above water? And I think you said it really wonderfully when you said, to take a step back, you said step aside, and so you can respond rather than react, and, keep things at a point of equanimity.
Yeah. And that's, you're better apart, is a great method that doesn't necessarily mean, a happy divorce, but it's just an understanding that, you're better apart than together. And you can still, I believe at least that if Nikki hadn't been receptive to my amends, or she didn't make amends to me, and it turned out differently, I think that I still could have had a happy divorce, at least because I had cleaned up my side of the street. And to me, that in turn, I can only control myself, right? I can't control. And that's why I said I went into that with no expectation of how it was going to turn out, right? I just went into it for, my peace of mind, so I could, make amends and clean up my side of the street. It just so happened that, Nikki, turned out to be receptive towards it. But I think the most important thing is to accept what you can. And a lot of the time is today, Nikki and I still clash. Like those character defects that made her cringe about me and vice versa still are there.
Right, of
They're
course.
still there. They still rear their ugly heads. Our happy divorce doesn't mean that Nikki and I don't fight or, tell each other, some colorful language, but, it's a lot easier to accept, when you love somebody, than when you're supposedly in love with somebody. And so, Nikki and I are just like brothers and sisters, best friends. And just like it is easy for you to accept your the character defects of your friends, than it is your partner, is what it is.
One thing I want to point out and let everybody know is that what I love about this book so much is one, it's just how colloquial it is, and how you've written it. It's exactly as anyone would talk. My daughter's has read several chapters out of it, particularly Asher's point of view, and that's the other thing to point out is that it was written by Nadia, Chad. So those are the new spouses, as well as Asher. He did a chapter in here. And it's really inspiring to see that all 5 of you contributed in a major way. And then, of course, the center's got a bunch of great pictures. They're really fun pictures to see. So I really hope people will really consider reading this, because it is truly the model of what we hope the 21st century of a co-parenting situation will be.
Yeah, and again,
so maybe a question I'd ask you on that is, like, when it comes to your relationship, let's say with Chad. I mean, we always talk about these ultra masculine relationships. You told me yourself you're one of these, kind of high-level, strong-headed kind of people. How did that relationship cultivate?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting.
Initial and probably some hard feelings.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because right after this apology. And this amends, and this spirit, I was glowing. I was such a spiritual giant. I had just been vulnerable as a man and said I was sorry. And a few months after that, Nikki starts dating Chad. Now, which is fine. I was dating, but the twist is that I knew Chad. And Nikki and I knew Chad while we were married, and they started dating after we split up. But all of a sudden, it's this test, right? All of a sudden, it's like, okay, you think you're such a giant, take this one. And so I really had to. It's one thing just to have another man around your son. It's another thing to have somebody who you considered a friend. And that's the reaction. He didn't do it, at me. Nikki and him fell in love. I mean, it happened. And so, I got this test right out of the gate. But what I came to find is, because I was a little bit more open, and along this, fake it until you make it stage, is an admiration for him. I tell a story when I think the first time that I can remember that we were all around together was after Asher had a baseball game, and I was coaching the game. Nikki and Chad were in the stands, and after the game, kids would run up to their parents and say hi, and Asher ran over, gave his mom a hug, and gave Chad a hug, and I slowly sauntered over there, and literally was trying to put on this fake. I wish I could take a picture of a smile, because it probably came off so inauthentic. But I went over there and I gave Chad a hug. I gave Nikki a kiss, and just as best as I could at that moment in time, tried to act like everything was fine, to give Asher the impression that everything was fine, that it was okay. It was okay for him to hug him. It was okay for him to to love him. And then, one of the turning point where no matter what BS I was trying to sell myself about Chad, and, was, he called me to coffee, asked me to coffee one day. And, I had, we actually ironically went to the same Starbucks and sat at the same coffee shop, or same table outside that Nikki and I did. And he said, first of all, it cleared it up, and was honest with me that this wasn't in his intention. Sorry for whatever appearance that I thought that he thought I might have had. that maybe not waiting till the body got cold or, whatever. And he just cleaned up, what he felt he needed to. And then he asked me if it was okay if he married Nikki. And at that moment in time, that whatever BS I was going to try to tell myself about this guy, or now look, he was going to do it anyways, right? If I had said no, and I tried to talk him out of it. And I tried to tell him, to give him some inside ball about what it was like to be married to Nikki. But he didn't, at the end of the day, he was going to do it anyways. But just the gesture, he didn't owe me that. He didn't need to do that. But at that point, I realized that he was an asset to our happy divorce, as we call it now, and not going to be a liability. And so, and then we grown very close and over mutual respect. I was, the thing is that no matter who Nikki dated, I was never going to have a say in that decision. And all I could hope was that man, or a woman, I don't think Nikki would ever do that, but was going to love Asher as much as I did. And treat him like a father. And Chad checks all those boxes. And so I, even if I wanted to, I have nothing to stand on as far as justification for not liking the guy. He's a likable guy.
I mean, I think you're an amazing person, really. You just brought up this memory for me. And it's even hard for me to I know this happened, but I can't exactly believe it happened. But I remember my father's father saying to me, I guess I was massaging my stepfather's shoulders, at the dinner table. He'd be come over, and I was and my stepfather was don't, I was being disrespectful to my father by hugging him. And it's funny because he's older now, and he has cancer, and he'll say to me, recently he said, "I love you, sweetie." And I was like, "Ooh," it just, I was like, "Oh, I love you too." But I was sort of trained, we have a very good relationship, my stepfather and I, but I was sort of told not to be expressive with him. And ask Susan and Michael, I'm very expressive. I'm "I love you." I'm very,
oh yeah.
but I'm not like that with my stepfather. And I was told not to be when I was 10. Right. And you just brought that memory up. So I'll probably have a good cry tonight. Thanks, Ben. No, just kidding.
Hey, nothing bad ever came out of good cry, but, the other thing is, and I'm here by myself, but, a lot of credit also needs to go to Nikki, because, Nadia is younger, sort of the stereotypical, guy whose second wife is younger. And, she welcomed Nadia into this little blended family, to the point of bringing her wedding. Well, first of all, telling me to marry her. And second of all, bringing the wedding dress to our wedding, Nadia's wedding dress, carrying it in her hands, hand delivering it to Nadia. So, Nikki, just as, again, back to relationships, taking two to make it and taking two to break it. And so, my attitude towards Chad is I'm sitting here alone. Great. But just as much credit needs to go to Nikki for how she handled the relationship with Nadia.
Well, and to your point about credit, as a step parent myself, I have to say you have two incredible step parents involved as well. I've met Chad and Nadia at least virtually. And, they stepped into a somewhat unique situation. What you and Nikki have created isn't what we see as a norm, sadly, in the divorce world. But it's a very, you've made this comment to me before, maybe it was Nikki, but that, if Nadia, I think you said, hadn't been able to accept this unique and close bond you had with your son's mother, that wasn't going to be able to work in your relationship. And I think Nikki has said the same. So, there's a lot of incredible all the way around here.
Absolutely. And that's, the role of a step parent, forget about the good divorce or the bad divorce, just coming into a situation, Sue, you had 3 times, right? Of trying to balance parenthood and not being the parent, but doing the parent things, but not being the parent, and that's a very thin balancing beam sometimes. Forget about how the parents get along. And I know Nadia and Chad, at least Nadia struggled with that at some point, but at the same time, we've brought them into being parents and we've included them. There are some little things that they don't get, but for big ticket items, we've had many family meetings with the four of us.
Wait, is Asher part of it?
No, because it was about disciplining them. So
how old was he? Because I grew up with that. Like my parents sat me down and said, you guys are not running ramshackle. That was their words. You're not running ramshackle around us. Like we're in charge.
Right.
You're not gonna be like Ben, your little friend down the block.
Yeah.
Right. Like Gabrielle, don't get any ideas.
Right. No.
So
it's the name. I get it.
And so we'd have no. I was talking about.
No, I know.
So we'd have these family meetings, and it was about discipline. And they would like talk to each other as though I weren't there, and then they would, bring me in. And of course, what I had to say didn't matter at all. They had already decided.
Right.
I think one of the reasons I love resolving cases so much is because nobody freaking listened to me. They were so into like how well they all got along with each other. And it's just, in retrospect, again, I think it's such a gift to have your parents be parents, right? Because what happens oftentimes in divorce is everyone is so wrapped up in their own social lives that the kids are just, completely not getting to be parented properly.
Well, and that, the one thing you said too is, so with the big ticket items, we've had plenty family meetings with the four of us. And then, Asher gets to come in after the pre-meeting once we're all on United Front and gets to sit there in front of four parents and get the punishment or get.
Maybe that's what I had.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't know. Maybe there was behind the scenes.
Oh, there was definitely behind the scenes.
You were really bringing a lot up for me, Ben.
Yeah, I know. This is a full there. I'll send you the bill. I'll send you the bill later.
Dad's coming out of this like, oh my God, I'm exhausted.
But the other thing that Susan alluded to was and I don't know how to say this, and I've always struggled with saying this without sounding like a jerk, but I truly believe, because of our dedication to not having Asher be burdened with the emotional bill to pay for this, that was first and foremost, right? And so we made a decision, we made a choice. We decided to get married, we decided to have Asher, we decided to get divorced. But we also decided never stop being his parent. And so that included bringing people into our lives, and to make sure that they weren't going to, and I don't know if it's the situation or sometimes it's the person, but sometimes, the person can come in and be a cog, in that wheel that was running so smoothly. And so I think our commitment to our son ran so deep at that point that we wouldn't be with the people we were with if they were going to come in and be a disruptor to Asher and to his well-being. And great story we also tell is Nikki. So Nikki calls me, and this was maybe a year after I'd left and a couple of months after our divorce, and she said, I really just want to talk to you about introducing new people to Asher. And, meanwhile, I think had already dated Chad. And she said, and Chad was around Asher. But she said, I want to ask you to not bring anybody around Asher until you're absolutely sure. Or at least not, no one can be absolute, right? But at least that you're sure that you're serious about her and that she's going to be around. And again, first reaction was, who the hell are you to tell me who I can and can't bring around my son? But stop, pause, take a moment. And what she was asking me was fair, right? What she was asking me was reasonable. That Fayr, Fayr. Yeah, both, right? Because what's best for Asher is not to have a revolving door of women in and out of his life, and it speaks to teaching him about relationships. If I had this revolving door after his parents had got divorced, what does that tell him about relationships or marriage. So after these, quite vivid, colorful thoughts about what I wanted to say to Nikki went through my head, I said, okay, you're right. It's not good for Asher to have this revolving door. So it was a year before Nadia met Asher. And then
was that the dinner where you pretended to bump into her?
Yeah.
I love that story. We did the same thing. I think that must be the universal, like, but don't meet the new significant other.
And look, the one thing that I don't think we give our kids credit for, at least we didn't, was kids are smarter than we think, and more aware than we give them credit for. And Asher, I think at some point a couple years ago said that he always wondered what that was about, but he remembered it. And they played Uno together and ate tacos, and then we started hanging out. But Nikki and Nadia hadn't met yet. And one night we were putting Asher to bed, and I always called Nikki before he went to bed so she could say goodnight. And he's on the phone with her, and Nadia and I are sitting at the side of his bed, and he goes, "Mom, have you met Nadia?"
Oh gosh.
And Nikki goes,
this is great.
Nikki goes, "No, but I want to one day." And he goes, "Here, talk to her." And he hands her the phone. Oh. And if only, again, if I had a picture of that face, all of a sudden my, brown wife turns white as white gets, and she goes, "Hello." And they talked, but it's just funny because I think it was, looking back on it, was Asher's way of saying it's time. It's time that I see this woman in Dad's life that's, seems to be around and important to him. I know my mom is obviously important to me. And so it's time these two women met. So he initiated the first conversation between Nikki and Nadia at 5 years old.
He brought his worlds together.
That's incredible.
Right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Kids are way smarter than we think they are.
They are. And the one thing that, at least this is, through my experience with my parents and, my experience with Asher's, sometimes as parents, we tell ourselves that our kids are resilient and they'll get over it. And I think to some extent that is true. As human beings, we can be resilient. But this is a scar that is a tough one to get over. And I think sometimes it's used for justification for behaviors. That's just my judgment. I didn't go to school. I'm not a therapist. But the people I talk to and even through my own experience, it's a scar that is tough to go away, and a scar that's tough to be resilient against. That doesn't mean that it can't happen and, kids won't thrive, but there's some damage being caused.
But remember, there's always damage caused, right? Like generally.
There's damage when parents are unhappy. And
if you think about the fact that nearly 50% of all couples get divorced, and of the 50-ish%, broad brushstrokes and numbers that stay together, there's a large number of that percent who is very unhappy. And then there's a whole continuum, right? So it's probably only a pretty small sliver of all coupled people who are just not damaging their kids. And most of them, maybe a lot of them don't even have kids.
Right. And the other thing is that this story is almost surreal to me because, again, if you had asked Nikki what we wanted out of it, after that coffee shop meeting, like I said, we would have overshot it. But if you're sitting there and you're listening to this, or you've heard Nikki and I talk, or it sounds absurd, it is absurd, but it's real. But it took time, and it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of commitment. Nikki and I are the two, perfect personalities to make, because we're so type A. Like once we put our minds to it, it's like, tunnel vision. But it took a long, long time. And there were some, we stepped in landmines that couples step in all the time through the divorce process. But we always came back to the table, and we always came back to the, it was said so many times in the book that our publisher said we had to edit out, but what's best for Asher? Like, we had to keep it that simple. We came up with this, 2 + 2 is probably the easiest equation we learn as kids, right? Equals 4. every decision we made, from custody to financial to even today, that answer has to be for Asher. I'll tell you.
I love that.
I'll tell you, there were some times, and still are some times today, where that answer is not for me. And sometimes it's, got a couple extra zeros on it. But as long as I can honestly and wholeheartedly say that it's for Asher, that's the one we go with. And so that's just like the simple, like we didn't have, it's so great today that there's so many resources. Like we wrote our book and it took 4 years. And Michael, you said that Chad and Nadia have a chapter and Asher have a chapter, because in just those years, the relationship evolved to the point where like, it didn't make sense for us to put out the book without them having a chapter in it.
Right.
And so, the process is always, equaling for Asher. And that's, and then so we wrote the book, released it, and then we go online and there's all these support groups and there's social media. As crazy as it sounds, like when we got divorced, there wasn't social media. There was MySpace, but I don't think they had divorce support groups or co-parenting support groups on MySpace. So, we sort of had to figure this out with the best we had. And the best way to do that was keep it simple, and the answer to the equation had to be for Asher.
No, man, what you've done is truly stellar. I've enjoyed all the time that we've had being able to get to know each other. Last week, you and I had a 4-hour conversation. I got to meet Asher and Nikki, and Ash was just what you've done with that boy is just incredible. You've both, it's so obvious that you've put him first, and there's just so much for you to be proud of. And Ben, we need to have you on again one of these times, but I guess we're at the end of our hour here. But
we'll be doing a little bit more here in the.
Yeah. Any like last, just people who are going through COVID real quickly. What's something, if you could surmise something in a sentence or two, just how do people handle? I mean, what do you guys do? Because clearly you two still fight on issues. Well, I should say fight, disagree on issues. What is it? Okay, you fight. Like if you could give people advice who are strapped right now, or their problems during COVID, disagreements and with each other, like what would you tell those couples from the 40,000 foot view that you have, because you've been through the whole thing? There's nothing they've experienced that really you haven't. What would you say?
Well, I think it's this is universal for struggle or hard time in general. But look, I don't know who exactly it's attributed to, but I believe Winston Churchill said it. So we'll just stick with that. But if you're going through hell, keep going. And that is what Nikki and I did through our divorce. Right now it's a type of hell. It's sort of, everybody, it sort of has manifested itself differently in different people, but everybody has had their cross to bear with this COVID and struggles. And, Nikki and I handled it from the beginning. It sort of is a microcosm of how we've handled this whole thing. And that's, we got on the phone, we didn't text, we didn't, do whatever. And we talked about a plan of how we were going to handle this situation. And it was a uniform plan that was going to be the same at both houses. So there weren't going to be different standards or different rules for Asher at her house than there was at mine, and vice versa. And so, it's funny that, I shouldn't say funny, ironic that, COVID starts with a co, right? And, co-parenting, cooperation, communication. The prefix co means together. And, it's the same way that, and I don't make a political statement, but it's the way that we're going to, the way we get out of this pandemic is together. And the way that Nikki and I got through our pandemic was together. They talk about teams and us versus them, and you're either right or wrong. You're either with us or against us. And, Nikki and I, from the beginning, were on the same team. We had singleness of purpose. And I think when you have singleness of purpose, and the singleness of purpose in that situation was our happiness for our son. things became simple. That doesn't necessarily mean they were easier, but they became pretty simple, right? And I said about the simple thing, but singleness of purpose, if you're committed to your son, daughter, or daughters or sons, it becomes a lot easier to get through this process. I think, COVID too, but with singleness of purpose and that's what Nikki and I did. So, we like to say, if we can do it, I think that we're pretty determined that anybody can do it. And the other thing is, it has different, to us, although it's the name of our book, and to us, it can have so many different faces and look so differently. And our happy divorce can be the United Colors of Benetton. As long as you're not burdening your son or your kids rather with your decisions, I think it's a happy divorce. If you can be at a school play and not have everybody, but most importantly your kids, feel that palpable tension, that's a happy divorce. So it doesn't have to be as extreme, as Nikki and ours are, but ours started off with just that small, with that small goal. So, it just keeps getting better. So, the only advice I can say is singleness of purpose. As long as you have that, I don't know if there's any, that sets you on the best path. Let's just say that.
Well, Ben, thank you very much. And everybody, again, the book is Our Happy Divorce. Definitely a fantastic read.
Only 3
I've got it too.
You guys all got them. Okay.
Yeah, we all got them. Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
Ben.
love 'em.
Read it twice.
You did.
But yes,
I definitely did. I've got it all underlined, etc.
But I think, just one thing, and I want to say this, but of course I got sidetracked and squirrel ran across my desk during conversation. But the fact, that people like Gabrielle, I mean, you and I have talked about this, and Susan and other real influencers who are doing, and influencers, I mean, by people who are names in the business, who are been around it for a long time, see the value in Nikki, my story, the value in your app, is because, they've been around, they see what is going on, and they've been around a long time, and it's whether it's a refreshing story or what they want to do. So they're not sitting on your live stream every week. Susan and Gab have been on our live stream. They're not just doing it because we're paying them very well, but because, it's going to take, a singleness purpose. We can't do it alone. Fayr can't do it alone. Susan can't. But I think that it's primed for, a sea change in the way people handle divorce. And I'm in awe of Susan and Gab, and just, glad to be part of the, as I call them, the cool club, the popular club,
part of the family.
Popular girls. So,
yeah. Well,
Part of the
Ben,
family.
thank you again, and come on, absolutely, anytime. You've got a standing invitation. And but yeah, for joining us for Co-parenting Simplified, the Fayr Way, and thank everybody else who did join in, and of course Gabrielle and Susan. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
Next
Thank
week.
you, Ben.
thank you, guys.